Hi, everyone. We're going to give it just another minute so everybody can settle in. All right, then we're going to get started now. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's episode of Velodyne Lidar's new digital learning series called Automation and Safety During COVID-19. My name is Pamela Gauci, and once again, I will be your host for this morning's episode. Joining me is my co-host, Mary Bochter, who will be assisting with running some slides in the background for us. Now, before I do a quick review of what you can expect today, I do want to say that we feel really lucky to have Dr. Ryan Chin from Optimus Ride here with us. And if you haven't had a chance to hear Ryan speak before, you'll understand why I say that by the time we're finished. So now for a quick look at our agenda, so you know what to expect. We will be focused on Optimus Ride and the crisis response they're doing with their autonomous vehicles. But before we dive into that, I'll spend a few minutes talking about how LiDAR works and why LiDAR is so important when it comes to autonomous vehicles. After that overview, I'll throw it over to Ryan for a brief presentation about Optimus Ride, and then we'll get right into our interview. I will save the last few minutes for some audience Q&A, so be sure to use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask questions anytime during the episode. I do want to mention that we're recording today's episode and it will be available to watch on Velodyne Lidar's YouTube channel. So now, what is LiDAR? LiDAR is an acronym for light detection and ranging. And when it comes to autonomous vehicles, LiDAR is often referred to as the eyes of the vehicle. But how does it work? So LiDAR uses an eye-safe laser beam to create a 3D map of the surrounding environment that's commonly called a point cloud. In order to break this down for you, we're going to show you a short video highlighting a single photon or particle of light. Now, you can see here as a single light photon will be emitted from a sensor that's positioned on top of a vehicle. The light photon hits the objects in the environment, and then it's bounced back to the LiDAR sensor, where the data from the light photon's travels are recorded. So it's measuring distance and time. And the amazing thing about this is that it works with moving objects. So those are things like pedestrians, bikes, and other cars, and that's in real time. And now, because LiDAR provides its own light source, it can also see at night. And that is an advantage over cameras, which can have trouble seeing in the dark. Now, a good LiDAR will have anywhere from 8 to 128 laser beams. The laser beams in a LiDAR sensor emit billions of photons per second at 360 degrees in order to completely see the surrounding environment. Now, if you think about that for a second, it is really amazing. The sensor is generating billions of data points and calculations, and that's in real time. And that is really how LiDAR can be seen as the eyes of a vehicle. And it assists the vehicle to keep passengers, other cars, and pedestrians on the road safe. You can see here that it's sort of like spraying paint all over the surface of the surrounding environment in order to highlight objects and to show their movement. Now, with that overview, you can understand how Velodyne Lidar sensors can act as the eyes on an Optimus Ride vehicle. And here you see one of Optimus Ride's deployed vehicles on the road. And that's our puck sensor on the vehicle there. There are actually 3 sensors on that vehicle, 2 pucks and 1 ultra puck. But I'll let today's guests tell you more about Optimus Ride as well as their vehicles. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Ryan C.C. Chin, co-founder and CEO of Optimus Ride. Welcome, Ryan.
Great, thank you so much for having me here. Let me start off by thanking Velodyne. I want to thank all the audience members that have joined as well. I'm happy to share a little bit about the company. And what I'm going to do now is just share my screen so you can see a presentation that I'll show you. And I'll also show a quick video as well. I'll take about 5-7 minutes on this and then happy to get into the interview. So a bit about Optimus Ride. Optimus Ride is a self-driving vehicle company based in Boston. We have been around since 2015. We're based in the Seaport area of Boston. So if you're familiar with that, that's the autonomous testing zone for the city that I helped to establish when I was at MIT previously. And we have over 100 engineers in the company now. We have deployments in 4 states as well as Washington, D.C. And we've been moving both passengers as well as goods as part of our service offering. The founding team comes from MIT, all 5 of us. Albert and Sertosh, which are on the left side of the screen, were the original members of the MIT team that entered into the Urban Challenge, DARPA Urban Challenge almost 12 years ago now. They are really experts in computer vision and robotics. Myself, I spent about 18 years at MIT developing electric shared vehicles, and I'll show you a picture of that. Ramiro in the center is our chief strategy officer. He is an expert in transportation, mass transit throughout the world, has built and raised capital to build mass transit systems, and is a real product expert. And then Jenny on the right side of the screen is a planning expert, as well as someone that's worked in business, particularly with Zipcar and Hertz and Avis in the shared economy. So she runs our operations. So we've decided to kind of work together based on our experience. I have built electric shared vehicles. This vehicle on the left is the MIT City Car. It's a foldable electric car that we designed with the architect Frank Gehry, as well as General Motors. GM was the principal sponsor. It's a vehicle that sort of rethinks the urban environment so that we can save on space and think about how we could maximize utility within cities. And that vehicle was a fully by-wired, fully electric vehicle that was capable of adding sensing compute, which is what essentially Albert and Sertosh worked on. That's the MIT entry into the Urban Challenge in 2007. You can see how densely packed that vehicle was back then. It had over $500,000 worth of equipment, completely stuffed to the gills with computation, and you can see how big and bulky the sensors were back then. And this basically finished the race. There were 6 teams that finished the race. MIT was one of them, and we decided to form a company around that. And the goal of the company has been, how do we deploy autonomous vehicles safely, but also in the fastest path possible? And for practical reasons, we basically said the best way to do that is to start in what we call geofenced areas, which is classified as perhaps a university campus, an industrial park, a self-driving zone in a city, a master plan development. These are places that you can basically predefine. And we put a limit of 25 miles per hour initially to start. We consider those to be the markets that self-driving vehicles can be deployed realistically in the time frame. That would be very different than a level 5 vehicle that is driving from Harvard Square to Times Square in New York in a blizzard. Like, we just don't think that that's possible right now. That might take a decade or longer, or maybe even a generation to get to. But we think it's very practical to think about this. In fact, there are 2 factors for autonomous vehicles, the adoption of autonomous vehicles. One is the speed of the vehicle, which is on the vertical axis here, and then the complexity of the environment. So the more complex you get, the harder it is to figure this out. And obviously, the faster you go, the more dangerous it can be. So what we think is the sweet spot for early deployment, initial beachhead markets for self-driving, is what we call the medium complexity environments. So that would be master plan developments. There are actually 152,000 master plan developments in the United States. About 8% of the US population lives in a planned community, right? University campuses, 4,000 of those in the US. Airports, resorts, you just keep going, right? And internationally, there are also smart cities, new cities that are being built and designed from the ground up. And you can imagine, if you were to design a city from the ground up, as opposed to retrofitting a city, it's actually much easier to deploy autonomous vehicles. On the opposite end, you see low-speed autonomous vehicles, like factory robots, Roombas, for example. Those are autonomous vehicles as well. They just operate in ultra-low speed and very simple environments. So we think the sweet spot for autonomous vehicles today is to deploy in these areas, and that's what we're doing. We've been focused on that. Our go-to-market strategy is to basically design, build, and operate electric self-driving vehicle systems, right? That's what we do. We work with our clients to do so. We target specific environments to do that. And we also can customize the logistics of it as well, which I'll talk a little bit about, right? So making it on demand versus station-based, we can do all of that. And we operate the service as well, at least today. The markets that we've gone to are the ones that I've talked about. The top 3 are the ones that we've focused a lot of our effort in the last 4 years. We have these 5 deployments that are contracts that we've signed to deploy this technology that we generate revenue from. And master plan developments are quite interesting because it's typically one owner, right, that they own and operate the entire community, right? Some of these communities have up to 100,000 people in them, so they're kind of small cities in themselves. So the deployments that we have already are these. We are operating in the seaport in Boston already. We've been driving on public roads for almost 3 years without incident in a very urban area here in Boston. We launched a program in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which is a 300-acre site in New York. We're the only and first autonomous vehicle company operating commercially in the state of New York. And that program launched in August of last year. We've had tens of thousands of rides in that location. We also launched a program with Brookfield, which is the world's largest real estate developer in Reston, Virginia, which is the Haley Rise deployment here. We've had over 40,000 rides in that location since we opened that in August. That's a high throughput site for us. And then just yesterday, we launched a new program with the Yards. The Yards is a second property owned by Brookfield Properties. They have many, many sites throughout the country. We just launched that yesterday, and we're going to start with delivery or logistics in this case. And the reason why we're doing that is because of COVID, right? In fact, if you look at Paradise Valley Estates, which is on the left side, that is a senior community, a 60-plus life plan community that we launched back in the fall. And when COVID hit, the seniors could not congregate in the dining hall anymore because of social distance. So the Paradise Valley asked us could you help provide meal delivery to the seniors? We've delivered almost 4,000 meals since the outbreak, and we're going to continue to do so. We're able to add this very interesting vertical, which is logistics, right? So that could be prepackaged foods, prepared foods, groceries, pharmaceuticals, packages in general. We've also added package delivery too, to provide this essential service during this period of time. And that has allowed us to open new, and despite COVID, open and sign new contracts to be able to deploy. And the Yards being in Washington, D.C., right next to the Nationals ballpark, right next to DOT, is a very, very prestige site for us. In terms of technology, we have the ability to do fixed route as well as on demand. It really depends on the site. Future applications, well, some of them are already today, like delivery. We've done that already. Material handling, that's happening. Logistics, advertising and so forth, that'll come later. And then on the technology side, we do everything in-house. We build our technology ourselves. We don't license from anywhere. We build everything in-house. All of the traditional elements of autonomous stack, right? Autonomy, perception, simulation, electromechanical integration. We could integrate into any vehicle type as well. And certainly we do a lot of the fleet orchestration as part of what we do. So finally, just to wrap up, intro to the company, we just unveiled a new project or a new product on Wednesday with Microsoft. It's called the Optimus Ride Virtual Rider Assistant. It is essentially an audio-visual interaction technology that allows the user to interact with the car. So just imagine now that the car is fully driverless. There's no operators on board. You get into the car, there's no safety operator there to talk to anymore, right? So this is allowing you to interact with the vehicle as well as the remote monitor that you can have access to as well. And it gives you information as well. And so this will be critical as, it's almost like, imagine like an Alexa or Siri for driverless vehicles. We basically are partnering with Microsoft on this. And so let me show you a video. It's just a short 1-minute video of what we unveiled just 2 days ago. Let me just shift now to that here. So let me play this video, and and it has some music, so I'll stop talking.
Hey, buddy. Yeah, I'm catching my ride home now. Did you wash your hands when you got home? Great. The little things make a really big difference to keep everyone healthy. Bye.
Welcome. To get us on our way, scan your ticket. If you need anything, press the support button and let us know how we can help. Now departing.
Hey, honey. Oh yeah, good call. I can stop by and pick up some more masks. Okay, great. Love you.
How can we help?
I'd like to change my destination to the health center, please.
Okay, updating trip to health center. We will arrive in approximately 3 minutes.
Sweet.
Arriving now. Please check the vehicle for all your belongings before exiting. Thank you for riding with Optimus.
Okay, that's a quick on Optimus.
It's so cool. Thanks, Ryan. I'm going to dive right into some interview questions here. So I wanted to start by asking about, you're based in Boston. I wanted to ask about your offices in Boston. I believe the city has begun to open back up this week. So can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing there? And also, does that mean that your offices are also opening back up?
Yeah, so there's a phased return back to opening that many states have. The state of Massachusetts, through the governor's office, is doing that. They have a 4-phase plan. We are reopening our office on June 1. Of course, the state reserves the right to change that if things get tricky. But we've been basically preparing ourselves for that. We're coming out of that. We have some folks already in the office because we are receiving vehicles and we need to get some things done prior to reopening the office, for everybody. And we will do it in phases. We're not expecting everyone to come in at the same time, but it's going to be critical as an autonomous vehicle company to be able to actually work on vehicles. I mean, ultimately, we can do a lot of things in simulation, but you need to work on vehicles eventually. And so we are prepared for that. We have all the social distancing. In fact, I laid out the office plan. We're able to get, I think, very good social distancing based on what we have. And the goal has been, how do we safely deploy these technologies and basically get to the point where you can get to contactless driverless delivery, right? These are things that will make the difference in a pandemic and after a pandemic.
Yeah, and you mentioned the site in California. You already changed the services that your previously deployed vehicles were doing there. Can you talk about those and the challenges that you've had to deal with pivoting your services in real time under that kind of pressure?
Yeah, so we basically agreed with Paradise Valley to pause on passenger service, right? They didn't want people to move, and we respected that. We agreed with them. That same day, we got a phone call from them saying, hey, we talked about this last week, but can you do meal delivery tonight for our seniors? That evening, I called the team back. We called the team back. We had actually just connected the battery of the car because we didn't know when we were going to come back. So we basically reconnected that, and we were able to basically set things up. We delivered, I think, 46 meals that evening for that group. And since then, we've done thousands of meals. Now, how were we able to do that? Well, we did some experiments before. We did a prescription drug delivery pilot here in Boston before that. We were preparing to do a delivery service at the Brooklyn Navy Yard until COVID hit and they went to work from home. So we were ready for that, right? We were prepared for it. In the long run, of course, you want to make some modifications to the vehicle itself, right? To physical modifications to the vehicle. The current vehicle is designed for passengers, but you could have modules or you could modify the vehicle to have packages and contactless delivery. So that over time we'll be able to adapt and add more features to it. And currently when we deploy at Paradise Valley, the service staff that actually prepare the meals, they actually get in the car and they do the last 30 feet from the car to the resident's home. They hit they call the person. We actually step away from the car, from the door. They come out and pick up the food, and that verifies whether they picked up the food, and then we move on to the next, to the next house. So that's how we're doing it there, just to maintain safe distance.
What type of response have you had from the residents there?
Oh, we've had all kinds of thank yous. We've had teddy bears. We've had thank you notes. We've had, you guys are superstars. We've had everything, and from the management as well. But seniors really, that's the most vulnerable population. At Paradise Valley, no one has been infected with COVID, actually. And actually, there's been quite these communities, many of them throughout the states have had, massive, infection rates, but not at Paradise Valley. Hopefully, we contributed to that. In fact, with package delivery, like Amazon and UPS, they actually have to stop at the main gate, and they're transferring packages through the security desk. So they're not actually delivering through that last mile. We're actually doing that now. We've added that to the meal program. So that, this new vertical we think is actually a very, very interesting new market.
So, and you mentioned that you actually, it's pretty amazing, you have a new deployment this week. How did that process of deployment change for you versus pre-pandemic?
Well, I mean, certainly because of the pandemic, if we were to just do passenger type of agreement, that would have to wait months. So we basically proposed to Brookfield, say, well, why don't we start with delivery first? We're going to add people later. Once COVID sort of, subsides, let's add that, and we'll have both packages as well as people moving. And they bought into it, not just because of the idea, but also because the tenants and the restaurants and the retailers that they have really are suffering around delivery. Like they're trying to stay open, right? But delivery is an additional cost, if they were to hire, a third party to do that. So Brookfield understood that. Also, we're providing some essential services, not to tenants, but to local businesses and to local schools as well, because there's some corporate social responsibility that Brookfield wants to do as well. So we teamed up to do that. That's how we got that agreement, that contract signed, essentially because of the circumstances.
So because of your affiliation with MIT, right, you have a long history with the city of Boston. And back before Optimus Ride even existed, the city was asking you for advice on how to create self-driving zones to enable companies to test and commercialize self-driving vehicles. So now the city has reached out to Optimus Ride seeking mobility alternatives for medical and essential workers fighting COVID-19. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the city reached out. I've known the city and worked with the city, the mayor's office, the Office of New Urban. Actually, we worked with them before they were created, the new Office of New Urban Mechanics, when I was at MIT, because the city had come over and said, "What's this smart cities idea?" Well, let me tell you what the smart cities is, and then we created this new urban mechanics thing. So that was many, many years ago. Since then, we work with them on establishing the self-driving testing regulations and policies for the state, not just in the city of Boston. It's expandable throughout all of Massachusetts. And then recently, because of COVID, they said, well, we might have some struggles with two areas. One is medical personnel, transportation of them, as well as supplies. And then the other is disadvantaged youth that go to school at public schools where they have a hot meal. A lot of folks don't have a hot meal at home. The only hot meal they have is at school. And so how do we provide that? They're still working out some of those scenarios, but we basically told them that we're ready to help them at any time, and we're fully prepared to do that.
And we have been hearing a lot in the news about things like fever detection and UV disinfection. What are your thoughts on those, and how could those things possibly be combined with autonomous vehicles during the crisis?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to, do all the things that the CDC and the WHO suggest, right? Certainly all the social distancing, making sure you have masks and PPE for your safety, safety operators, providing wipes down, regular clean, all those things that you have to be diligent at, we're doing. I think what you're suggesting is that there may be some new technologies that we can incorporate on top of sensing that we already have to be able to even detect or analyze these elements. I think that's completely feasible. It'll take some time to integrate. And just imagine though, I mean, the autonomous vehicle is a sensorized device, right? It's a very complicated and complex machine that has sensing, actuation, right, and compute on board. So what's the big deal of adding another layer of sensing and compute on top of that to be able to create a very, very robust system, not just for autonomy, but also caring for the passengers themselves and their personal health. I think that is a pretty interesting area to be able to augment on top of what you already have.
So I'm curious, has the pandemic shifted the mindset internally for your team? Will this change some of your strategy moving forward in the future, or no?
Well, I think the new vertical in logistics is going to augment what we have, right? And we'll have to be strategic about how we want to add energy to that. But I think there's a lot of traction on that side, particularly from investors and particularly from clients as well. I think there's a very, very interesting activity in that space. The goal, of course, is still to get to fully driverless as soon as possible. That should be the industry goal for everyone. And the reason for that is that during a pandemic, there are the need of essential personnel as well as logistics and other means for the situations that we're talking about. So getting to fully driverless, that actually is underscored by the pandemic as well. And we think that given our approach, which is to start in these lower speed geofenced areas, you can get there faster. But the pandemic on top of that makes it even more of an imperative to do so. So I think that's really an industry-wide goal, but we are getting very, very close to that. In fact, the video that you saw has no steering wheel in it. And we've been doing a lot of testing on that. And we're, the plan is to basically deploy that on one of our sites, very, very soon.
And what about the testing? I mean, under lockdown, how are you testing vehicles? Does this affect that?
Yeah, so certainly every company that's been out there in autonomous vehicles has had pause in testing, at least physical testing on cars on the road. We have our own test track, which is also in the Boston area. We're able to use that. We have our indoor test track, and because we're classified as essential service, we can also test on public roads in Boston as well. We're going to start ramping that up more as well. You can't go too many months without actually testing and actually gathering new data. I mean, certainly we did a lot of testing in anticipation of COVID and gathering data so that we could use that for some period of time, but eventually you need to get back on the road again. And that's really, really critical for any autonomous vehicle company.
So can you touch on some of the important economic ramifications you think the crisis has created for the AV industry? And do you think that that could affect the timeline for development and deployment of fully autonomous vehicles?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, COVID is really going to shake out, a bit in terms of all kinds of players, large and small autonomous vehicle players. Some that there's been quite a bit of pushback recently. This is pre-COVID. Of milestones. Like you look at the level 5 moonshot type of companies, they basically, a lot of them have said, oh, well, you know what, we're going to wait a year before we start doing, driverless. Oh, we're going to wait a little bit before we remove safety drivers. We're going to, lower expectations on the places that we can go to, or the environments that we're driving in and the weather that we're driving in. We've already seen that in the last year. So COVID is only going to exacerbate that lower expectation. And, a lot of folks aren't going to be able to deliver. We feel that, we took a very contrarian view towards this 4 years ago. We said, we're not going to do that. We're actually going to try to take a very practical approach, a very strategic approach on how to deploy autonomous vehicles realistically. And now I think it's become, sort of accepted that that's actually going to be the assertive way to actually do it. So we feel we're very well positioned, but there will be a number of companies that will struggle with this throughout the next year or so.
So I'm curious, the conversations that you have with local government or even the public, have those conversations changed in the past few months?
I think that that depends on where you are, but a number of governments have basically seen the opportunity around this. I think that both here in the United States as well as externally as well. And I think the key to all of that is you have to have a real program, a real system, a real deployment. You can have TED Talks and talk about, the future, and I've done plenty of, I have plenty of those that I've done. But the key to that is actually having a real deployment, because you can show people how it actually works, right? And seeing is believing, and that's really the key for whether it's the government or whether it's a client. And certainly I think that there's been a lot more receptiveness because of the situation, and how do you actually provide that mobility?
All right, so I'm going to ask a couple more questions, then we'll move it to audience Q&A. So urban mobility and smart cities, those are things you've been working on long before Optimus Ride was formed. And it seems like COVID-19 really kind of amplifies modern issues in urban areas with overcrowding, lack of space, lack of parking, and even pollution. So do you think that this crisis could jumpstart or open a push to make changes in urban planning in the future?
Yeah, it's going to be, there's some complexity and contradiction to all of this, to cite Robert Venturi, right? Because of COVID, people aren't moving, and the air pollution has actually gotten much better, right? That's one aspect of it. And then, as an urban planner and someone that thinks about smart cities, shared mobility is going to be critical, right? Because that's how you actually get to sustainable environments. But when you have a crowded subway, people are now worried about the pandemic and how that affects. So there's all these things that are happening. There's also a number of cities basically taking the opportunity now, because there's less traffic, to actually widen streets and add bicycle lanes that are much wider. And that's certainly a positive thing. There's been some discussion too, because gas prices are low, that this is actually a good time to put in a gas tax or a congestion charge, for example. So there is a very, very wicked problem, right, of how do you fix that? I think one thing that we need to know for sure is that people still need to live in cities, right? And even though we'll work from home right now, the level of interaction will ultimately require us not to be living in our little cell at home, because that only gets you so far. Interactions are important because that's the reason why people exist. You know, we're social creatures, and cities are a result of that, right? So we'll have to, pandemic-proof our cities, or at least make them more resilient. At the same time, figure out where are the benefits in terms of sustainability and energy to make that work. That's going to be a very, very difficult problem, right? And a crisis like this, you don't want to waste this crisis, right? You want to be able to take this crisis and basically, think through that. That will be a challenge for everybody. From our side, we're trying to do whatever we can to help out and to prove that the technology is a key enabler for creating that future city.
So before I throw it over to audience Q&A, I'll ask one more question. And because we are Velodyne Lidar, it will be about Lidar. So what are your thoughts on Lidar as an essential technology for autonomous vehicles? And can you highlight maybe a case where Lidar stands out in its perception capability?
Yeah, so LiDAR is essential, at least present day it's essential. There's been lots of discussion of camera only, camera versus LiDAR. Our view is that LiDAR is essential, at least in today, and likely for some time as well. Getting to a vision only system is going to be quite difficult in the near term. It might take a bit of time to get there. And the other reason why even if you were to get to a vision only system, you want to have redundancy, right? You want to be able to, there's certain things that LiDAR is really good at that cameras aren't, or other sensors are not as good as, like radar, for example, or sonar. So what you want to have is a mixed, modality system where you're able to take information from all types of sensors, look at the best type of sensing for the type of environment that you're looking for, and fuse that all together to create a very robust type of sensor suite. So ultimately, you do need that, and there are things that cameras are actually better than LiDAR on. But I think at this phase, the best companies, the ones that have the most robust autonomy, are the ones that are able to fuse data and make sense of it, right? And LiDAR is a critical part of that, for sure.
All right, well, I have tons more questions, but I'm gonna move to audience Q&A for a few minutes. So I do have someone asking, has the autonomous vehicle industry progressed as quickly as you envisioned it since the 2007 DARPA challenge?
Yeah, well, it's progressed for sure, and there have been a number of major moments as well. But it's playing out, the diagram I showed earlier, this sort of speed complexity diagram, is exactly how I think it's been played out. Like that diagram we put together 5 years ago. Some of the players have moved, some of them have been acquired, some of them have disappeared off the planet. They're all, but that I think fundamentally is still the same. Speed, complexity. How do you actually, deploy these things? And there are different angles, right? The level 2 versus 3 versus 4 versus 5. 5 is tough to get to, and I think everyone's sort of lowering their expectation there. So from my view, we have progressed as fast as we thought, and there was a lot of hype also about robotaxis in level 5. But the reality is that the ones that are getting traction are long-haul trucks, the geofence type of approach that we're trying to do. I think factory robots have also improved as well. So it just, again, it goes back to, can you actually drive in a very complex environment under very bad weather? That's going to be really hard even for people to do. So let's try to basically come up with a path to get there. And I think that's actually playing out today. You see it today.
Yeah, and I actually have a question here asking about handling poor weather conditions. Boston in the winter can be a little extreme.
Yeah, so we have handled extreme, classified as adverse weather. We have driven in snow, post-snow, rain, heavy rain, fog, hail. Actually, we had hail, I think in May last year, actually here in Boston. So we've done all of that. I think that it's still, a lot of work to be done. And in fact, it really depends on where you're testing, right? A lot of companies have moved to Arizona, right, where they have zero snow. I mean, and so that is part of the lowering our expectations. At the same time, the U.S. has 70% snow coverage, right? Even though you might only get snow once a year, you still have coverage, right? And so how do you deal with that? I think we have some unique advantages here in the Northeast, and in Boston, we have the weather, we have the drivers, and we have the roads. They're all unique to be able to deal with that. So
I have a question here. Someone is asking, could you tell us a little more about the partnership with Microsoft?
Yeah, Microsoft, the first piece of it, I'll be able only to talk about the first piece of it, is this virtual ride assistant. It is really building upon two things. One is our expertise in autonomy, right? Everything that I talked about here. And then Microsoft's expertise in cloud, in voice recognition, and also in cognitive AI. And they have a lot of other things going on too. So how do we create a complementary partnership where we can create these new products that are super critical, not only like in the future, because as I mentioned, when we move to driverless, this will be really important, but also present day as well. So that partnership that's just part number one. We're gonna have a lot more exciting things with Microsoft coming up, in the next coming months, and we'll make those announcements as well. Ultimately the goal is how do we take self-driving systems and scale globally, right? And you need to have partners to do that, right? Microsoft is a great partner. We have other partners too, but Microsoft is a great partner for a number of aspects.
So you just mentioned scaling globally, and I have a couple of questions that are sort of related to that. How many vehicles do you think in, say, 5 years you would plan to have deployed?
Oh, well, we have projections of projections, obviously, but it literally needs to be in the tens of thousands of vehicles in 5 years, from now. If you look at, the number of deployments, the number of sites, we have this thing called large scale deployments. We call them LSDs, right? So large scale deployments would be, where you have 50, anywhere between 25 to 100 vehicles on a site. And that's important because you want to get to these large scale deployments where you have many vehicles in a confined area, because that gets you the data and the data density that you need to be able to develop really robust systems, right? Now imagine if you're driving in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, that 300-acre site, we're gonna go through every intersection tens of thousands of times, right? And with the same vehicles. We're gonna know at a very nuanced level what it's like to drive on that street, what it's like to interact with pedestrians that live and work in Brooklyn, in that zip code of Brooklyn, right? In a very, very fine way. That would be very different than saying, all right, we're going to drive all over Manhattan with the same number of vehicles, and we might pass the street a few times as opposed to 10,000 times, right? So I think that's going to be really critical to get to that. Otherwise, you're just not going to get to where you want to go as a company. So that's going to be, something we need to hit.
So I have somebody asking about your average driving speed.
Average driving speed is somewhere between, well, it depends on the site, right? So the average, the speed limit in Boston is actually Vision Zero, 25 miles per hour or less. So we average somewhere between 15 and 20 to 25 miles per hour, depending on the location. The Brooklyn Navy Yard is 15 miles per hour, right? So these speeds aren't that fast, but I don't think people should think about it that way, because urban speeds in general are actually very low, right? The average speed in Shanghai is 9 miles per hour. Right, the average speed in London is 10 miles per hour. The average speed in New York is 14 miles per hour. Right, the average speed in London has not changed in 100 years. In fact, before horses and carriages, it was still around that speed as well. So it's not about high speed; it's about complexity and doing it at lower speed. And that would be urban, whether it's geofenced or whether it's on a public road in a city street.
So I have a ton more questions, but we're already a little bit over, so I will ask one last audience question. Are you looking to deploy vehicles overseas, or are you just focused in the US?
So we are. We have a number of potential clients overseas that we are working through right now. And certainly there is a very strong possibility of doing something very soon internationally as well. And we're very excited about that possibility. You'd only be able to do that based on the fact that we've done a number of deployments here, right? You just can't go straight to international. You have to have a number of deployments already. And the Navy Yard, for example, being very, very urban, has been a kind of launching pad for all this international activity. So we do see that happening, and stay tuned for announcements on that.
Cool. So we are unfortunately out of time. If we didn't get to your question, no problem, because Mary is going to put the contact information up for both myself and Ryan. So you can reach out to us with any questions about autonomous vehicles or Optimus Ride or LiDAR technology. And again, this webinar recording will be available to view on Velodyne's YouTube channel. And I do want to thank you again, Ryan, so much for joining us today. And we hope you'll come back and update us on how the new deployment's going and any other new announcements you have.
Glad to do so. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. And I do want to thank our audience as well. And if you're interested in learning more about automation and safety during COVID-19, join us for our next episode on Friday, June 5th, when we'll be featuring Shahab Kokar from ClearPath Robotics. Thank you.